Hello, and welcome to the HTML introduction presentation for EME6507. While we will address HTML authoring throughout this course, I wanted to use this presentation to address some basic extraneous issues related to web authoring and developing content for web publication. First, just a few quick definitions. It is important to understand the distinction between the Internet, which is a vast network of networks in which information travels through a variety of protocols, including File Transfer Protocol, or FTP, email, and others, and the World Wide Web, which is a specific portion of the Internet which provides content accessible through a web browser. The web uses Hypertext Transfer Protocol to access this content. Lastly, in this course, we're going to explore the basic language used on the web, which is HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language and is a language that any computer can read. It is also important to note that HTML authoring can be done in web editors, obviously, and other applications such as text editors. Throughout this course, we're going to discuss a variety of web authoring tools. A few of these include Dreamweaver, which is essentially the industry standard for web editing, InView, which is an open source web authoring tool, and Microsoft's Front Page and SharePoint Designer, which many novices like because they have very office-like interfaces, so they tend to be more familiar with the usability aspects of these tools. There are a variety of others that will be mentioned in the course as well, but these are three of the primary ones. As a novice web developer, it is important to have a basic understanding of URLs or web addresses. So over the next few slides, we're going to examine the various components of a typical URL. The first part of a URL represents a type of information or protocol, and these might include mail to, / for email, HTTP, / for hypertext transfer protocol or basic web pages, or FTP, / for file transfer. Following the type of information being transmitted is the domain and server information. So if our server was a computer called Education on UCF's network, which is on the edu domain, and the type of information being transmitted was a typical web page, the initial part of the domain would be http / education.ucf.edu. Following the type of information and server domain information is a series of directories and subdomains, subfolders, and then files. Directories or subdomains might include specific user sites, while subfolders would be any folders used to organize information on the server or within a specific site, such as EME2040 if I were organizing folders for a specific course, or a variety of other subfolder possibilities such as images, to include all images, or web to include any other web documents that I might be including on my site. Files would then include the content that you want the users to access. These might include basic web pages or non-web folders such as PDFs, PowerPoint, or videos. Let's revisit domains for a second. On this slide are a number of common domains, although there are many others. These include the ever-popular .coms for commercial organizations, .edu for educational institutions, .gov for government organizations, .mil for military, .net for network, and .org for organizations that do not fit into other categories. Now in the past, these were adhered to somewhat closely. However, in more recent years, anyone can purchase a .org, .net, or .com domain name, as well as some others. When dealing with the web, it is important to follow a number of naming conventions. And actually, these are my file naming rules for both web files, as well as typical files I use in everyday life, such as PDFs, Word documents, or others. First, when posting to the web, make sure that your file name does not include spaces. I'm sure many of you have seen web URLs with the %20 included. And this is how the web deals with spaces in file names. It inserts a %20 into the file name. And this is one notification that the web editor or web creator was actually a novice, as they included a space in the file name. Next, Do not use capital letters. While in the past, many URLs were not case sensitive, with the advent of URL shorteners and other tools, this is not the case anymore. And you don't want to have to remember, did I capitalize that for each word within a file name? Next, keep it short and sweet. Use abbreviated versions of words and use those in the file name whenever possible. Next, develop a system. For example, I typically use hyphens as opposed to underscores to separate sections of a file name. Or for spaces. I also try to use single syllable portions of long words to keep the file name short, which is kind of related to rule number 3. Lastly, be consistent. So you've developed a system, you want to be consistent with that system throughout. So if you use hyphens, always use hyphens. Don't use underscores. Use the same types of abbreviations. So I typically use the first syllable of a long word if that lets me know what that word means. And sometimes I'll go into a little bit more, but typically I use the first syllable. And following all of these rules is going to help you as you begin the web authoring process. So let's take a look at a quick example. A student has a subdomain on the EME-IDT.UCF.edu server called Tommy Knight, and this is their individual domain. He uploads a folder called EME6507, and within that folder is another folder called Assignments. He wants to find the URL of his assignment called pptactivity.htm, which is a web version of a PowerPoint application activity. What is the URL for this assignment? So pause this presentation and figure this out before proceeding to the next slide. So if we break down the URL, we see that the server is http://eme-idt.ucf.edu. The subdomain is Tommy Knight. The first folder is EME6507, and the subfolder of that is Assignments. And the file that we want to access is pptactivity.htm. So using the typical URL configuration of server/subdomain/folder1/folder2/file extension, then we see that the URL is http://eme-idt.ucf.edu/tommyknight/eme6507/assignments/pptactivity.htm. Now, as we move out in a URL, each different section is separated by slashes. So if there were more folders, then we would simply add them to the URL to get to the file that we wanted, separating each of them by slashes. Also, in this case, we were just accessing a web page, so the initial portion, the http:// is going to be just that. However, if we were uploading to the web or a file to the web or something like that, we might use the FTP protocol. Here are some tips and tricks to consider when organizing your website. First, create a single folder for your website. In naming the folder as well as the files in the folder, be sure to follow the naming conventions previously addressed in this presentation and make sure the naming of the folder and files in the folder makes sense. In the folder, create subfolders to organize content, particularly for large websites. For example, you might have a picture or images folder for graphics, or a projects folder to house all of your projects. Lastly, always work from a consistent location, preferably a hard drive location as opposed to a flash memory location. Then replace files on backup devices as appropriate. Usually I work from my home office computer and then use a flash drive to transfer files to USB and then to other backups. And if I work from another location, I always make sure I update my home office computer with the most recent version as soon as possible. Before we address issues related to planning a site, I wanted to touch on a few coding or tag issues. Whenever you look at code, a link is represented by the href tag. And if we look at the links troubleshooting example here, we see that the first link is linked to a My Documents folder on someone's C drive. If you see this in the code of a web page, you're trying to access a link that most likely will not work, because if you're accessing it remotely, you're most likely not going to have access to somebody's My Documents folder on their C drive, which is a good thing. The second example shows a relationship to a particular file and folder. This example says that the link is located in a web folder and is called index.htm from the current page. So this link is actually subordinate of the existing page that you are referencing from. Lastly, when adding links to external resources, it is useful to first test the link, test the site, and then copy and paste the URL in the appropriate location. And we'll get into adding external links as we move through the course. Next, whenever you look at the code for an image, the source is indicated by IMG-SRC. Again, if we look at the troubleshooting examples, we see the first image is located in an images folder, which is in someone's web folder in their My Documents folder on their C drive. Again, this is most likely not accessible from the web. The second example follows the same line of thought as mentioned in the hyperlink example above. A good tip for images is to make sure that you include an images folder, and included in this folder in the main folder or the root folder for the site. So make sure that your images folder is at the main level just inside the main web folder. When planning a site, you want to follow good instructional design principles. Define the purpose of the site, have a clear understanding of how visitors will use the site, plan the appearance of the content on the site using a storyboard, plan how users will navigate the site, plan the overall appearance, and then test the site. As we move through the course, we will explore many of these issues in much more detail, as well as other issues presented here. This concludes the brief HTML introduction presentation for EME6507.